it's the end of an old year and the continuation of a tradition I've been doing for the last several years, but with a brand new twist to it. For many years now, I've done a top 10 list of my 10 favorite books of the year. This year I'm doing a couple of things differently. First of all, it has been such a fantastic year for reading that for the first time ever, I have split the list up into two lists because I simply couldn't narrow it down to 10 books. I have top 10 nonfiction books, which I'll be discussing in this video, and I'm posting a second video in which I'm discussing my top 10 fiction books. The other thing, of course, that's new is the video format. While I still have the traditional list on the blog, I've been enjoying making video blogs so much this year that I've decided to include a video element to the top 10 book list. One of the problems I've had that's kind of kept me from book blogging in the vlog format is that almost everything I read these days is an ebook. You know, I read it all on my playbook, and so I noticed that a lot of great book video bloggers, like for example Carrie Cullip Book Fridge, who's just started video blogging this year, like to hold up copies of the books they've read so they have something visual for you to look at. It's very hard to do when you're reading ebooks. Some of the books I do have copies of around this year, sometimes because I'm giving them away as gifts, but I'm also going to be bombing in and out of the bookstore and any other place I may be able to pick up a copy of the book to show you if at all possible, just so you got something besides, just me talking about the book to look at. So let's begin with my 10 favorite nonfiction books of 2012. Drop Dead Healthy. A.J. Jacobs always, without fail, makes me laugh a lot, and this book is no exception. You remember him probably best for The Year of Living Biblically. This is kind of like this. He's taken on another one of his crazy challenges. In this, it's the desire to become the healthiest man alive. Now, this is not quite as straightforward as The Year of Living Biblically, where he had, a fairly discrete text, i.e. the Bible, to work with. Here he just tries to search out as much information and opinions and views about healthy living as he can, and then tries to actually follow them. Sometimes he actually does end up getting healthier. Other times there are hilarious results, and you really come out of this book with tremendous admiration for his wife who puts up with all this. But I presume it brings in a fairly good income, so maybe that's her motivation. Anyway, some good information about health in here amongst everything else, but a lot of good laughs as well from the always reliable A.J. Jacobs. Okay, so there's a couple of books on the nonfiction list that I could not get copies of to show you even by going to the bookstore. I read them on my ebook, and there aren't any at the moment in my local bookstore. I've already discovered by trial and error that this doesn't work very well. Maybe you can get an idea of what the book cover looks like, but this book is Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal. It's a memoir by British writer Jeanette Winterson. It covers some of the same territory as her novel Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which I haven't read yet but really want to now that I've read this one. It's a memoir about growing up as the adopted child of extremely conservative Pentecostal parents in the north of England, and then coming out herself as a lesbian and trying to make sense of her, I guess you would have to say at least borderline abusive childhood, eventually reconnecting with her birth mother, and then having to face that difficult situation where the birth parent always hopes that they've given up their child to a better home, and having to break it to her that no, it wasn't really. It's a really complex and interesting story, and the thing is, she's such a great storyteller that it is so well told and really absorbing. It's always a huge pleasure when I can include on my best of list a book by a local author, or at least in this case an author with local connections, Bobby French, Finding Me in France. Bobby French and I have a lot in common. We're both writers and bloggers. We're both Newfoundlanders. We're both exceptionally tall women. Although we're not related, we actually have some relatives in common, which tells you how small a place Newfoundland is in many ways. We both, in our non-writing working lives, have worked with at-risk youth and adolescents. And she has let her hair go naturally gray, and I fantasize about doing that. The big difference between us is, while I like to travel but love to have my home base here in St. John's, Bobby really has gypsy feet, likes to move around from place to place, and her big dream was to uproot it all and move to another country. She moved to France. Out of her blog about that experience, this book came about. It is an absolutely beautiful book, gorgeous production values, beautifully produced by creative publishers, and illustrated with photographs by Bobby's husband. It's a really enjoyable read by a woman who took the big flying leap that so many people dream of and simply moved to France. Yet another one that you may have some difficulty seeing, Small Man in a Book by Rob Brydon. I don't usually read celebrity memoirs. I read a couple this year that I loved. Admittedly, my value of celebrity is perhaps, fairly low. It basically means people who make me laugh on BBC quiz shows. This is the first. You'll be hearing about the second in a minute. Rob Brydon comes across on screen as a really funny, affable guy, and he comes across in his memoir exactly the same way. He's a Welsh comedian. He has some really interesting things to say, more interesting than I would have expected in a celebrity bio, about the process of making it in a career in show business, and some really interesting reflections about success and when is enough? When is it time to say I'm happy with the level of success I've achieved, and when do you want to push harder and say no, I want more? So there was some serious reflection in among an awful lot of really funny stuff. Like a lot of celebrity bios, if you don't know the actor himself, you may not find it as absorbing. If you've seen him on one of the quiz shows like Would I Lie to You or QI, or if you've seen him in his role as Uncle Bryn in Gavin and Stacey, you may enjoy Rob Brydon's Small Man in a Book. This one really doesn't have much in the way of a visible cover, but it is called The Night of the Gun by David Carr, subtitled A Reporter Investigates the Darkest Story of His Life, His Own. Now, I'm a real sucker for addiction memoirs. I read a lot of them, but this one is really different, and it stood out to me. Carr has an interesting life story for sure. He used to be both a journalist and a cocaine addict. He got clean, he got custody of his small twin daughters and raised them as a single dad, and then he battled cancer. But what's really interesting about all this is that he starts writing his memoir, the story of his life, many years after these events happen, and he starts calling into question the accuracy of his own memory in a way that most memoir writers don't. Starting with a single incident, the night of the gun, from which the title takes its name, which he remembers as an absolute turning point in his life. When he goes back to check the events with the friend who shared it with him, his friend has a completely different memory of how things unfolded. Using that as the catalyst, Carr uses the tools of his trade, investigative reporting, to uncover his own past as though it were someone else's story. Interviewing, checking medical records, legal records, and often highlighting the fact that the way he remembers the story isn't the way that other people or the records remember it happening. And in all of that, he really highlights the whole idea of how unreliable memory is and the way in which we tell our own stories. And that's something that absolutely fascinates me, even more than addiction and recovery. So this very engaging book with a really interesting take on the writing of a memoir was a real hit with me. Holy Ghost Girl by Donna Johnson is a really, really interesting memoir that I absolutely love. Donna Johnson grew up, I guess, as part of the entourage of a traveling tent evangelist. Her mother was both part of the ministry and also involved with the evangelist, and she really gets inside that world of the fundamentalist, holy roller preachers. And even though it's a very specific world and a very specific slice of religious experience, I think anybody who's grown up in a conservative or fundamentalist evangelical world, or being curious about it, is going to find something intriguing about this really warm and wise and thought-provoking look back at her childhood in that world. Holy Ghost Girl, Donna Johnson, great reading. For the kind of nonfiction that's going to take you to another time and place and give you a really in-depth and complex view of a world you might never get to see on your own, I can't recommend anything higher than Catherine Boo's Behind the Beautiful Forevers. It's subtitled Life, Death, and Hope in a Mumbai Undercity, and it follows very closely the lives of several people living in a Mumbai slum over a lengthy period of time. She talks about her own process in doing the research and how she got to talk to these people. And we learn a lot about poverty, about ambition, about corruption, about why some of the problems of poverty are so intractable and not yielding to the kind of easy solutions that we in the West would like to believe in. But it's all done with such a human touch and with such very, very real characters, because of course they are real characters, they're real people. And for some insight into some of the real issues around global poverty, you really need to read this book. One more hard-to-see selection from the e-reader, not even available in Canada as an actual book yet. I read it as an e-book, and then Jason insisted on buying the audio book as well. David Mitchell's Backstory. You may remember I said that I had read 2 celebrity bios this year, both of British comedians. While I liked Rob Brydon's Small Man in a Book, I love David Mitchell's backstory. David Mitchell absolutely cracks me up. He may be known to viewers on this side of the Atlantic. If you watch any BBC stuff, he may be known from Peep Show, Mitchell and Webb, QI, Would I Lie to You, lots of other shows where he's appeared as a guest or panelist, and of course here on the internet as in his absolutely hilarious series of soapboxes, which crack me up every time. He's got a very funny speaking style, which I guess is kind of an uptight rant, and really the whole book is like that, but it's a lot funnier than you would expect an uptight rant to be. He talks about having back problems, he talks about walking all over London, he talks about going to Cambridge, and of course trying to break into a career in comedy, and it is never not funny. So I thoroughly enjoyed this book, certainly in terms of a celebrity bio, if that's what you want to call it. It's the best one I've ever read. If you like David Mitchell at all, click on one of the soapboxes to see if you like David Mitchell at all. I think you would really enjoy this book. I certainly did. I always feel like I kind of have to apologize when I've raved about a book and so has Oprah, as though I'm getting all my book recommendations from Oprah. Sometimes it just happens that we like the same books. This one I actually read before Oprah started raving about it. I got the recommendation from my friend Katrina, whose taste I trust far more than Oprah's, but it really is a fantastic memoir. Partly because I think of the time and distance that she allowed to pass before she wrote about the journey. You've probably heard by now, it's a story about a woman who, utterly unprepared, took an incredibly long and grueling hike at a really crucial time in her life, and just really about what it taught her. I found it incredibly absorbing, probably because I like memoirs and I like hiking, but I would not want to do this hike. So, #1 nonfiction book for the year. It's very rare that a writer has 2 great books out in the same year. It's even rarer that I would read them both in the same year. More rare still that they would both make my top 10 nonfiction list, and that they would be #2 and #1 on that list is incredible. But I have to give the #1 spot to Cheryl Strayed's other book this year, Tiny Beautiful Things. This book grew out of an online column called Dear Sugar, which Cheryl used to write anonymously. People would write in with, advice column stuff, the, sort of life and relationship problems that people write to advice columnists about. But, wow, this is not your grandmother's Dear Abby. Cheryl's writing is incredibly raw and honest. She tells it just like it is to people. Her language is salty when it needs to be, saltier than some readers might like, but bracing for others. And most importantly, even though her other well-known book this year, Wild, was memoir, this kind of is too in a way, because she pulls things out of her own experience and writes about her own life in such a way that each one is a tiny little memoir essay, and yet at the same time perfectly targeted to the person she's addressing. I found this an absolutely riveting read. I bought a copy for myself, I bought a copy for my classroom, and I bought copies to give away to several close friends. I love the book that much. Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. So as always, I've told you the books I've read this year. I usually have some kind of challenge or puzzle or quiz that ends with me giving away some books. This year is no different, except there's not a quiz. I kind of want you to do something for me. One of my big interests this year has been starting this YouTube channel. I started with the Writing Wednesday videos to talk about the process of writing a novel. In the coming year, I'm going to branch out into talking about books as well. I'll still be keeping my book review blog, Compulsive Overreader, but I'm also going to be doing a monthly review of books here on the video blog. And as a result, obviously I'd like to have more people watching. So for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, on the video, I would love it if you would leave a comment, if you would like this, if you would subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, or if you would share this on Facebook or Twitter and let me know that you've done so. Everyone who does that, I will put your name in for a drawing, and of the people who help me promote these videos, I'm going to give away, I guess I'm going to draw for 2 books from the fiction list and 2 books from the nonfiction list, so I'll be giving away 4 books altogether. If you shared this and I haven't noticed that you've done that, you can email me at my email address and I'll be glad to hear from you. And I guess that's about it. I'd love to give away some books. I'd love to get more people watching these videos because I'm looking forward to more great reading in 2013. I don't know if it could possibly be as good as 2012 has been, but I've got high hopes, and I'm looking forward both to reading great books, reviewing them, and also talking about them here.